having a rough day. And I can't say that I've had a lot of rough, bad days as of late, because I don't remember the last time I had one. And the last time I did have a rough time was like not even a full day. It was like a half a day or a part of a day. But I find that whenever I help people or whenever I focus on doing for others or offering others opportunities or doing this work or just reading, immediately it's a pivot. It's a pivot because I will end a conversation with one person and it's a rough situation, and then I can sit there and just think and think and think and think, and every time I think, it activates that energy, it reactivates that struggle, that suffering. So do I want to reactivate the suffering I was just enduring because this is not a situation I can change, or do I just let myself continue moving forward and just let it go? And so usually when I start talking to the next client or when I start doing these lives, immediately whatever was bothering me tends to fade away, and then I tend to forget things. So, and I'm really good at forgetting things, actually. Forgetting stuff is like my cup of tea. I just forget stuff because it's just my personality, and also because of my ADD. But it's easier to just let it go. And then if I remember what was bothering me that day, and then I start to think back to that, immediately I reactivate and I re-trigger that old vibration, that old state of being. And this happens also in relationships as well, because whenever with my ex, whenever we would break up, we would spend some time apart, and then I would talk to him or we would message, and then immediately it would reactivate all of the emotional energy attached to that person. So this is why I'm very adamant that if you were trying to end a relationship or move on and let someone go, do not give yourself a chance to sit and ponder and think past the first 2 or 3 weeks of that. The first 2 or 3 weeks of any end is going to be painful as hell, but then once you get past that initial painful period where you don't feel like you want to chop off your own arm, at that point you start to allow in more of other things. And so your mind starts to pivot more naturally and pivots back to the things that you were focused on before that person. And so if you stop and think again about that person or reinitiate those old thinking habits and patterns, you reactivate that energy, that emotional energy, and then it immediately starts to trigger all of the pain that you were going through in the loss again. So that's why I'm like, if you're going to end a relationship, give yourself, and my sister's really good at this because she's been through enough breakups. And she learned, and I was worried about her because when my sister was younger, she was always suicidal and she wasn't a very stable personality. And I was always worried that any breakup would trigger her going into this spiral and she would want to hurt herself. But as time progressed and she started to see what I would do, she started to learn my habits, and that's what she would do. So after a breakup, and this happened in the last like 5 or 6 breakups that she's had over many years. But after the breakup, she would go into a very vulnerable state and she would become very emotional. She would cry a lot, but she knew from experience and from seeing me, she knew she was going to come out of it, and this was just a moment experience. And so usually and she was faster than I. It would take me 2 or 3 weeks because I don't let go of things that easily when it's emotional connection. But for her, she would be good after 3 or 4 days of like intense crying, and then after that, doesn't mean that she didn't think about that person or feel for that person. She wouldn't allow herself to focus on it or to give it much energy. And so she would pivot and focus on other things. And then she would just recoup. Meanwhile, all of her exes, and I think this has been with most of her exes, they would be reaching out to her and emailing her. She still has several exes from years ago who still keep contacting her. So it's like, okay, girl, like, these are people, and I get it because, that's happened to me before too. But that's the thing. You don't reactivate the old painful energy. Once you get past that immediate response of suffering and pain and struggle, and as soon as you come out of that, do not reactivate it. If you start a conversation with your ex, if you go back and start communicating with them, you're just reactivating that energy. And it's going to take 2 or 3 more weeks. Again, it's almost like a reset. You reset that period of recovery. And so you reset it, and then you go through that whole process again. And then you have to deal with the obsessive thinking of that person and all that craziness. So that's why I say, if you break up with somebody and it's done, unless there is a good reason to communicate with that person, just do not talk to the person. Move on, drop it, and let it go. Because if not, you're just going to reinitiate and reactivate old energy.